Hello, and welcome back to Dave and Namaki, Shiny Side Out with the show number that is also here. We have now, very good. To the second hour of the show today, and it is the anniversary of the event of 9/11, of course, 21 years. We will have a show cycle following the hybrid show cycle in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, which will be fairly lengthy and detailed, but it's best if we don't lose momentum with the animal-human hybrids, because that story just gained a lot more relevance over the last couple of years when the Japanese changed their laws. So I think Dave and I decided to stick with it and then go to the anniversary show when this show cycle concludes. So you know what's coming. We've talked about it in the first half a little bit, but just to recap, Dave. We are talking about the quest to create animal-human hybrids, specifically ape-human hybrids. We spoke a little bit about that.
The chimpanzee.
Yeah, exactly. This is not even a joke.
No, it's not a joke.
And yeah, you're correct. And it's really quite a disturbing. I think in some ways it is disturbing because you're blurring the lines between species. We are very quick to ascertain, what humans are, what human rights are, etc., etc. We don't have that same need for speed when it comes to the ascertaining of rights for animals. I mean, animal rights, it's a fairly new concept in many ways, right? Universal animal rights. I mean, things like the protection for animal societies, etc., etc. All of those, animal welfare organizations. That's a relatively new development. Nobody a couple of years ago really gave a hoot.
In fact, we didn't even think that animals had feelings or felt anything.
No,
it's like them yelping when you hurt them, but that's just an automatic response.
Yeah, it's just instinct.
Yeah,
right. So, and look, the same thing can be said about plants these days, but we're nowhere near as far ahead with our thinking.
The vegans are going to have a real hard time trying to eat something after we tell them they've got feelings.
That's funny but true.
That is
because plants communicate. We know plants react to stimuli, etc. Much slower, of course, than us animals, if you will. But certainly plants.
Groot.
Exactly. But plants form neural networks. They talk to each other. They favor their offspring over others.
That's right.
There's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean,
and they communicate. They communicate
yes.
when grass is getting cut by the lawnmower or an animal is eating it. Yeah. The plants around it will receive a message to increase production of a chemical which makes them less tasty.
Yes. So they react to stimuli, and that's one of the definitions of to some extent, I guess, self-aware life, if you will, right? And the not just the reaction to stimuli, but also communication, unprompted communication, reaction to music. Plants do react to music, believe it or not. So that's a whole. Plus, I don't know if you've heard of Kirlian photography.
Yes.
Which is really this methodology or this process to take pictures of the energetic auras that we all have around ourselves. I mean, we are electricity, we are energy, right, in our bodies, and apparently Kirlian photography.
We have it.
Plants have it, 100%. In fact, the funny thing is this: if you take a picture of a person that has lost a limb, as it were, the Kirlian photo that would be developed would show that limb still being there in energetic form, explaining to some extent phantom limb pain.
That's right.
For example, but look, it is really important to understand that we are on the threshold of being able to, if we haven't already crossed it, in fact, animal-human hybrid creations. We are now able. Certainly much closer now than we ever were. And like we spoke about Ilya Ivanov, who did it the old-fashioned way. He tried to use artificial insemination, like the way we have been breeding animals for thousands of years, right? And he tried to get somewhere. Whereas we, of course, in our enlightened age, have tools like the CRISPR, a gene editing tool, and other gene manipulating and editing tools as well, such as they are coming. Even we started off the show cycle with ads for this. That you can actually take advantage of these services yourself if you wanted to have genes edited, etc., etc. There was a scientist. I think I told you guys the story. He was on a talk show or something or other, and he had altered, I think, 10, 12, something like that, like a small amount of cells in his body. He had gene edited cells in his body, like living cells, and he had injected in those cells certain information from, I think it was a jellyfish that glowed in the dark, so bioluminescence. So those cells, those you can't see, you have to get a microscope to see, but those cells of his that he altered in that way, not his whole body, but those handful of cells, they now are able to produce bioluminescence. So that's in a living creature, cell information being changed in a living creature.
Well, you can do it now via an injection, which is using the same technology, mRNA technology. And
mRNA, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, doesn't it? And it's made by the CRISPR program has now gone public, where we had heard about it for years before, but we were just told we were crazy conspiracy theorists. But now CRISPR's announced. Well, that's nothing new. I take that. I wear that as a badge. But what's happened now is Beam and Pfizer have gotten together and they've decided that they're going to fully fund the CRISPR program, and so they're going to start with genetic disorders and just cure them by rewriting your DNA in your body while you're alive. Isn't it? What?
Incredible. Now, because this is the same protocols in which the vaccines were delivered recently, in some of the vaccines, the new ones, it makes you wonder if anything else was delivered at the same time.
Exactly.
On purpose. Yeah. We just don't know, right?
Because there's not a scientist that's public that would ever announce it if it were true, and everyone is in denial because we all make the assumption that it is what the intended use was. That's what it was, clearly. But have you tested it? No.
Yeah. Look, just one thing on COVID, because I do talk to friends of mine that are medical professionals, etc. This is from a clinical psychologist who's been in the field for decades now, right? And he in fact is not well himself, but what he says to me is in the medical literature, all sorts of post-COVID issues are anticipated beyond immediate heart, lung, and cognitive issues. This includes the expectation of neurodegenerative and neurodevelopment disorders that will show themselves many years from now, potentially decades. Scary stuff. Yeah. This is just it's like in WhatsApp, in fact, it's just a communication, like private messaging that we have between ourselves. But that's I mean, he's up to date, obviously, with the kind of stuff. He's in the field. And now that's the expectation of a lot of experts in the field, that we will see these potentially scary long COVID side effects.
Well, those discussions are now open as best as they can be, which is a big surprise because of the information that we're now hearing counters some of that initial conversation that was very one-sided. I do remember a bunch of claims about the vaccine from the media and the heads of medicine, which now we've learned is not the case. And I'm not going to say anything more than that. But it's surprising that we could be deplatformed for discussing it. I think it's really important. Well, we could have been deplatformed for discussing, having those conversations then, but now it appears as though you're allowed to. So I think because the effort or the imperative of having everyone vaccinated has now come and gone. So I always claim that if aliens are real and the Earth was ever in peril, that we'd have to match the environment we're going to go to, and this it's really a stretch. But could you imagine if I was running a sci-fi, that the whole population of the planet had to be basically inoculated, like we had to get smallpox and all those things when we went to travel, and typhoid. We had to get those inoculations. Imagine if that was the case. So in the next 5 years, if we all get lifted off the planet, I'm not making it up, not saying it's real, but wow, what a story that would be.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
But it's crazy we have the technology. I'll take it back.
No, but it is. Well, the problem is, of course, that we're not mature enough or responsible enough to use it wisely. That's the problem, right? We're just not. Not just you or me or anyone in particular. It's just us as a species. We don't have that maturity, and that's why
we can't make weapons and not use them. That's the other way of putting it in that sentence.
100%. It is terrifying, but you're right. Now, I'm not 100% sure because I got different markings here. Do you know?
I do. I know that we're at blasts from the past.
That's what I thought. Perfect. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm glad that we agree. This is by Stephanie Payne, and this was the 20th of August 2008 when this was published, and it's Blast from the Past, the Soviet Ape Man Scandal. In February 1926, Russian biologist Ilya Ivanov set out for Guinea in French West Africa. He planned to perform one of the world's most sensational experiments. Ivanov was an expert in artificial insemination and had used his groundbreaking methods to create an assortment of hybrid animals. Now he was going to try something even more radical, crossing an ape and a human. Given it's like, 96 point something percent the same, you'd imagine that there might be some hope there. I mean, I kind of get it. His trip to Africa was expensive and its purpose highly questionable. Yet the Bolshevik, I've never had to say that from text in my past, government not only sanctioned it, but also financed it at a time when few Russians were allowed to leave the country. Why would so eminent a scientist risk his reputation? And why did the Bolsheviks back him? It was the story with everything. Secret papers, an evil Soviet dictator, and a zealous zoologist hell-bent on breeding a creature that was half man, half ape. When details of Ilya Ivanov's attempts to create an ape-human hybrid emerged in the 1990s from the newly opened Russian archives, they prompted a rash of lurid headlines. Ivanov became the Red Frankenstein. His proposed liaisons were invariably dangerous. There was even the suggestion that he had been ordered to breed super strong, hairy warriors for what the Sun in London dubbed Stalin's mutant ape army. What a headline. Yet Ivanov's efforts during the 1920s to create an ape-human hybrid had been anything but secret, according to Alexander Etkind, a Soviet-born specialist in Russian history, now at the University of Cambridge. Ivanov's project was a sensation at the time and generated almost as many headlines as it would later on. But when no ape man materialized, the fuss died down and his research was forgotten. Some 60 years later, scholars reconstructed events from scattered letters, notebooks, and diaries held in assorted government archives. Despite years of digging, however, one vital part of the story remains elusive. None of these documents reveal why he did it, says Etkind. After examining the available evidence, he thinks he has an answer. Studies in History and Philosophy and Biological and Biomedical Sciences, Volume 39, page 205, if you've got a copy on your shelf. Check it out. At the start of the 25th century, Ivanov was internationally acclaimed for his pioneering work in artificial insemination. In those days, it was called AI. And having perfected his methods, he was keen to see how they could be applied. His first big project was aimed at improving in Imperial Russia's bloodstock, using sperm from the best stallions. Before long, he was pondering the possibilities of hybridization. With artificial intelligence, he reckoned he might be able to create novel types of domestic animal by crossing closely related species. Soon, he had produced a Z-donk, a zebra-donkey hybrid, a zubron, a European bison cow cross, and various combinations of rats, mice, guinea pigs, and rabbits. In 1910, he told a gathering of zoologists that it might even be possible to create hybrids between humans and their closest relatives. Meki. Hello.
Sorry, before we go on, so I was on mute. Before we go on, just pause for a second here and think about this for a second. This is one guy. Admittedly, he probably worked with others, but a small group of people at most, but certainly with one outstanding guy, Ivanov, who pursued this. Now, just imagine how much other stuff might have been going on elsewhere. Okay, so 60 years have gone by. We pretty much forgot his research because it didn't go anywhere, because it was meant to be forgotten, etc., etc. And it was similar with Tesla. It's only recently, or fairly recently, in the last couple of decades, that Tesla made a comeback into our consciousness. For the longest time, it was just Edison.
Mm-hmm.
Tesla, or Marconi for that matter.
Thief.
Well, there's that, right? So just to be perfectly clear, I just wonder how many other scientists labored out there in the world whose research is now, well, maybe not lost to us, but certainly forgotten, on the verge of major breakthroughs, or in fact having had those breakthroughs. Now, what comes to mind, of course, is anti-gravity is one, right? Because there's a lot of work done in that field, and if we can believe, some of the things that are coming out of skunk works, that work was continued with massive breakthroughs, which we are not aware of. But sorry,
it's also rumored that the US continued the chimpanzee. So if you Google that, you'll find the stories that I'm talking about, where apparently they created a chimpanzee.
Yes. And we will actually get to that in due course. But you're right, Dave. So and I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, what kind of person is it? A person? Is it a person? Is it an animal? What is it? We don't know, right? Now let's continue though. Now after he said that he was going to maybe possibly create hybrids between humans and their close relatives, he said he was just speculating at that point in the 1920s, right? But a decade and a revolution later, he was making plans to put theory into practice. Sorry, in 1910 he was speculating. In 1924, he put his proposals to the government. This is the Russian government, of course. Despite the disapproval of the scientific establishment, Ivanov got the go-ahead and the funds to mount an expedition to Africa to collect apes. Documents show that the decision was pushed through by leading members of the Bolshevik government. That would have been Stalin as well, I would imagine. In February 1926, Ivanov set off for Africa. His first stop was Paris, where he won the enthusiastic support of the directors of the Pasteur Institute and the promise of access to the chimps at its new primate center in Guinea, then part of French West Africa. He reached Guinea in late March, only to discover none of the chimps were mature enough to breed. He would have to return later in the year to capture some chimps of his own. Ivanov passed the summer in Paris, where he spent some of his time at the Pasteur Institute working on ways to capture and subdue chimps, and some with the celebrated surgeon Sergei Voronov, inventor of an increasingly fashionable rejuvenation therapy. It is now notorious. In a now notorious operation, Voronov grafted slices of ape testes into those of rich and aging men, hoping to regain their former vigor. Not sure that's such a good idea. That summer, he and Ivanov made headlines by transplanting a woman's ovary into a chimp called Nora, and then inseminating her with human sperm. while the press waited for the outcome, reporters turned their attention to Ivanov's unusual project. The idea of an ape-human hybrid was both shocking and fascinating. Was it possible? Were humans really that closely related to apes? What would the results be like? And what were the Soviets up to? In November, Ivanov returned to Guinea, captured his chimps, and with considerable difficulty eventually inseminated 3 of them. By now, he had a second experiment in mind, to inseminate women with chimp sperm. Knowing that no local woman would agree, he planned to do this under the pretext of a medical examination, but the French governor forbade it. None of the 3 chimps conceived. Disappointed, Ivanov headed home with 20 chimps in stock. To stock a new ape nursery in the subtropical Soviet Republic of Abkhazia. He knew now that his best chance of creating his hybrid was to find Soviet women willing to carry half-ape babies in the interests of science. In the event, only 4 chimps made it to Abkhazia, and so while the nursery set about acquiring more apes, Ivanov looked for volunteers. Now, hold on to your seats here, everybody. At least 5 women volunteered. But although the nursery did get hold of an assortment of apes, they never flourished. And by the time Ivanov was ready to proceed, the only adult male left was Tarzan, a 26-year-old orangutan. Ivanov pressed on until fate dealt his project a fatal blow. Tarzan had a brain hemorrhage. The orang died, and we are looking for a replacement. Ivanov cabled the woman he had lined up to receive Tarzan's sperm. More chimps arrived in 1930, but Ivanov fell victim to the widespread purge of scientists and was exiled to Kazakhstan. He was released the next year, but died soon after. 5 women offered to carry half-ape babies in the interests of science. Just think about that for a second. So why did Ivanov want so badly to produce a baby that was half ape, half human? And why did the Bolsheviks encourage him, Dave?
When Ivanov put his proposal to the Academy of Sciences, he painted it as the experiment that would prove men had evolved from apes. If he crossed an ape and a human and produced viable offspring, then that would mean Darwin was right about how closely related we are, says Etkind. When Ivanov approached the government, he stressed how proving Darwin right would strike a blow against religion. Oh, that was the style at the time, wasn't it? Which the Bolsheviks were struggling to stamp out. Success would not only bolster the reputation of Soviet science, but provide useful anti-religious propaganda to boot. That might seem motive enough, yet as Etkin points out, some have suggested that the aging Bolsheviks leaders had something less intellectual in mind. And as a quote, there is conjecture that Ivanov was sent to Africa to bring back apes in order to provide them with glands for rejuvenation. End quote. The Kremlin's doctors certainly dabbed in rejuvenation treatments, and Ivanov did have links to Voronov, but Etkind is not convinced. Quoting, "If you want to cover up a bizarre scheme to rejuvenate aging politicians, then you wouldn't choose an even more bizarre project that's going to attract a lot of publicity." End quote. I think the crazier it is, the less people look at it. There's a third possible motive, that Ivanov's research was part of an ambitious plan to transform society. The high-ranking Bolsheviks who backed Ivanov were intellectuals who saw science as a means of realizing their dream of a socialist utopia. Politicians could change the political system, nationalize industries, and turn farms into vast collectives. But the task of transforming people was entrusted to scientists, says Etkind. The aim was, he says, to match people to the socialist design of Soviet society. Brave new world. One way to do that was through positive eugenics, using artificial insemination to speed up the spread of desirable traits, a willingness to live and work communally, for instance, and to get rid of primitive traits such as competitiveness, greed, and the desire to own property, which I do believe, Mickey, that all of the social Soviet society leaders they would not be deleted from them. All right, there were many projects aimed at changing humanity, Ekin said. Ivanov's was the most extreme, but if he succeeded, then that would show that humans could be changed in radical and creative ways. Ekin believes this is the most likely reason why the Bolsheviks backed the project, and that it was also what motivated Ivanov, at least in part. Like many others, Ivanov was swept along by the Bolshevik dream, he says. He had proved that artificial insemination had the capacity to change nature, and testing its limits was perfectly in tune with the revolutionary times. At the end of the day, Ivanov was a typical Russian intellectual. His ends and means today sound truly radical, but if you think about it, successful hybridization with apes is no more fantastic than a happy life in a communal apartment.
Bit nuts, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
If you think about that for a second, I mean, here's a guy that is, and not just a guy, but this is the entire, well, enough members of the Politburo in Soviet Union are behind him to finance him. Trips to Africa, trips to Paris. I mean, back then, Russians weren't allowed to travel.
Mm-hmm.
This is pre-World War II, remember, right?
Yeah.
Pre-World War II. I mean, the Russian Revolution was in its infancy, more or less. I mean, it's only been 10 years, you know, since the death of the Romanovs. You know, when Mr. Ivanov got really started here in his hybridization efforts, right? So this was a changing world, and the Bolsheviks, the communists in Russia, were keen to hold on to power and prove their ideology right. You know, and if you can prove that evolution is correct, because this is really, I mean, you know, communism is it's not a direct result of Darwin's theory of evolution, but it's certainly it's contemporary, right? Those two are they're parallel kinds of thoughts where, you know, human beings are just that. We're not created by a higher power, God. And if that's true, then, you know, then kings and queens and such don't have God-given right to rule over us either, right? Just before that, you have to understand the way that these monarchs and kings and queens and emperors and whatever held power was because God had to defer to the power onto them, right? That's why the royalties were always in bed with the church and vice versa. Because they had to, I mean, where do you get, the question is why, I mean, it's in Monty Python, the sketch, you know, when they're riding the field. I mean, who made you my king? I didn't vote for you, right?
That's some lovely field over here.
Yeah, it's a lady in the lake gave me a sword. Guess what? It's not a form of government to have a tart in the lake. The large body of water give you, a bit of a rusty stick. I mean, that's fair point, though. I mean, we like the mythology of it, but why do these people have the right to rule? Why, you know, and this was really at the basis of communism and evolutionary theory and all that. It took God out of the equation, right? So no one has a God-given right to anything because there's no God. That's what the communists said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we could prove that humans can interbreed with the great apes, all the better. Clearly, then we must be, no pun intended, but come from the same tree, and from a species perspective, and that's really the thing that I find fascinating. I mean, they put a lot. I mean, Hitler did the same kind of thing when he was looking for, artifacts that proved Aryan superiority, or lost mythological objects, or maybe even lost tech in the Himalayas, right? Because the thing is these people, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini to a lesser extent, they had the wealth of a whole nation and the manpower, not to be sexist, of a whole nation behind them to fulfill their goals. They had a whole. I mean, there was entire empires that were just driven by them to their ends. And this is one of them. I mean, this is quite astounding. Now, there's something else, another article here, which is interesting. Just a slightly different spin on things. It's not as long, and this was written by Kirill Rosilanov, and he's a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, where the article we shared with you before was from New Scientist. So this is a Russian source. And Beyond Species, Ilya Ivanov and his experiments on crossbreeding humans and anthropoid apes, which is the great apes. Abstract, and we're really only sharing the abstract here with you guys. Argument, I believe that some pollutions are used as analogies for expressing a general view of the social disorder. Mary Douglas, Purity and Danger. The possibility of crossing humans with other anthropoid species has been discussed in fiction as well as in scientific literature during the 20th century. Professor Ilya Ivanov's attempt to achieve this was crucial for the beginning of organized primate research in the Soviet Union and remains one of the most interesting and controversial experiments that was ever done on non-human primates. The possibility of removing the boundary that separates humans from other animal species, apes in particular, is loaded with important political meaning and violates cultural and ethical taboos. The history of Ivanov's scientific experiments thus helps to reveal some of the 20th century's important cultural conventions and hidden assumptions about human nature, species, and social hierarchy, as we've just discussed. Now, I've also abridged this, by the way. The emerging Soviet Union in this same time period evidenced a very different reception to Darwin's ideas. In the mid-1920s, Dr. Ilya Ivanov, a respected Russian biologist specializing in reproductive physiology, received approval from the Soviet Academy of Sciences to design experiments to produce a new interbred cross-species between humans and chimpanzees. These experiments were reputed to have had ideological support from North American atheists, as well as the Pasteur Institute in Paris, but their primary benefactors were Soviet scientists and anti-religion activists. Researchers have offered different perspectives on what may be suggested by this experimental history, but it is clear that Ivanov's work contributed to a branch of Soviet science that was invested in proving the evolutionary continuity between great apes and humans. Certainly, Ivanov could not have pursued these kinds of experiments had he not received initial support from the mainstream of Soviet science. These same racist ideas made African populations easy targets of exploitation as experimental subjects, and in Ivanov's case, even enabled the apparent state approval of experiments involving the artificial insemination of unknowing African women. Yet, as Russian historian of science Kirill Rosyanov in 2002 reminds us, racist ideologies have been integral to the theories of groups orienting to discontinuity as well as continuity. The US-based Ku Klux Klan is a case in point. Although its early 20th century instantiation rejected evolutionary theory as anti-Christian, it nevertheless embraced hierarchical models of race that prioritized white purity and condemned hybridity. Nevertheless, it seems that the Soviet government and the Academy of Sciences sent an expedition to Africa in February 1926, with the main goal of artificially inseminating chimpanzee females with human sperm so as to obtain a viable hybrid of the two species. The effort was directed by Professor Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov, who inseminated 3 chimpanzee females with human sperm during the first half of 1927, but failed to obtain a hybrid. Ivanov subsequently attempted to arrange further experiments on the artificial insemination of women volunteers with the sperm of a orangutan, as we discussed earlier. His efforts stopped when he was arrested by the Soviet secret police in December 1930. Now, just on that, this is where the abstract ends, or where I ended it. Did he really stop? Did the efforts really stop? Did the secret police arrest him so that it would no longer be in the public eye, that his research would be carried out in secret, even though he died soon after? Did they take everything he had and simply went somewhere else? I don't know. Now, Dave, the next one, I think you will love, because that's the one you mentioned earlier.
Yes. Scientists playing God managed to create a human chimpanzee hybrid. Adrii Tapalga, there you go, October 23, 2021. Human females inseminated with ape sperm. For many years during the 20th century, scientists performing many horrid and unethical experiments on animals trying to combine them with human genes in order to create an abomination they call a hybrid between humans and animals. Such experiments have been kept secret for many years, but due to an incident that took place in 2018, many answers have come to light about the origin of these experiments. An evolutionary psychologist by the name of Gordon Gallup stated that in the 1920s, the first chimpanzee was born at a secret research facility in Florida. Even if he was not born at the time, he was told so by his professor, who had worked thousands of hours researching such a hybrid entity, and its possibility to life. He also says that the chimpanzee was killed soon after its birth due to the pressure they received for their experiment. This is the closest that scientists have come to playing God, and this is definitely going too far. It keeps going, right? What is a chimpanzee? This is combining the genes and cells of humans and chimpanzees to form an entity that is half human and half chimpanzee. From all the animals, a chimpanzee has the most similar organism to a human one, with a 99% of coding DNA sequences in common. Not quite true, it's 98.2. Therefore, it had the highest chances for success in such an experiment. Now, you would think that this was a lab-born hybrid. However, it actually wasn't. Technology at the time, especially in the scientific field, was not so advanced as we are talking about 100 years ago. So the way that Professor Gallup explained it occurred was as follows. The scientist inseminated a female chimpanzee with human semen from an anonymous donor. They say that outside the lab. A chimpanzee, there's pictured here is a chimpanzee who's very muscular. A chimpanzee from the 1920s believed to be the first chimpanzee, source Wikimedia Commons. Scientists were surprised to see that not only did the female chimpanzee get pregnant, but she also gave birth to a healthy chimpanzee, as Professor Gallup named this hybrid. However, upon seeing this abomination in front of their eyes, the scientists working on the project were pressured by moral and ethical issues. Therefore, they decided to kill the chimpanzee. What happened after, or what abilities this new hybrid had, is unknown. There are rumors that the hybrid was able to say a few words in English and grasp the use of objects around him or her much quicker than most chimpanzees, confirming that her IQ was much higher than expected. Oh, you take it.
Now, just on that, now, as we said, as I shared with you in the early article just before this one, that Ivanov had help, or at least encouragement, from American or North American atheists. Now, I wonder, because the time frame is the same here, Ivanov, okay, and Gallup worked around the same time frame. I wonder, Dave, if there were any,
cross-pollination.
Cross-breeding efforts cross-pollination. Yeah? But did they share research? Did they work together in some way? Is that possible? Now, the article was back to Ivanov, the first known attempt. However, this wasn't the first attempt to create such a hybrid. The first recorded attempt, or better said, attempts, were by Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov, a Russian biologist. As we all know, in 1910, he presented the idea to the World Congress of Zoologists in Vienna, who seemed to have approved of this unethical enterprise. Now, Vienna, obviously, this is in Austria, And this was not a communist congress. Interestingly enough, he received a study grant of $10,000, which is now about $300,000, from the Soviet Financial Commission to carry out his experiments before being approved by the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The only thing that made the Soviet Academy of Sciences approve the experiment was his reasoning in the pitch he gave. It is not certain what Ivanov's true experiment, or his intent rather, was with the experiment, but in his pitch he said that with this experiment he could prove once and for all Darwin's theory of evolution, which defines that we have evolved from chimpanzees. Now, that is actually not true at all. Chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, and us, if anything, come from the same missing link, if you will, same common ancestors, most likely. We did not evolve from chimpanzees because then there would be no more chimpanzees, because we have evolved from them and displaced them. So we did not evolve from them, but we rather evolved from the same common ancestor. Right? Just to be clear on that. Some researchers state that the experiment was done at the order of Joseph Stalin, who was looking to create a new type of soldier that would be insensitive to pain. Ivanov started inseminating 3 female chimpanzees with human sperm through artificial insemination. The only difference was that none of the female chimpanzees achieved pregnancy. He did some research to discover why none of the female chimpanzees achieved pregnancy, and he found that due to insemination, there was a 1 in 6 chance of pregnancy. In 1920, he kept trying, but still wasn't able to get any results. In the same decade, he decided to look at the project from a different perspective. What if human females could be inseminated with ape sperm? This experiment was almost carried out in 1929, but luckily was cancelled as Ivanov's last orangutan had died. This time, even if the experiment never took place, even the Soviet government decided that Ivanov simply crossed the line and therefore was exiled to Kazakhstan to work at the Kazakh Veterinary Zootechnical Institute. Now, it is really important to understand here that we don't really know if he was successful. I mean, we know that obviously it seems that he wasn't, but it seems to be a numbers game as well. Okay, if it was, you could only achieve pregnancy in 1 out of 6 cases. So by that logic, if he had inseminated 100 chimpanzees with human sperm, or 100 females with ape sperm, he should have had some success. So it's just a numbers game at this point, right? But again, tell us more about the human Z. Dave?
In the shadows for years. That's where they've been making human Zs. Since 1929, there were no attempts that anyone knows of, even if it is more than likely that a lot more sick scientists were trying to achieve the same result that the research facility in Florida achieved in 1920. Or maybe they were too busy creating biological weapons for the Cold War. From a chronological perspective, the next attempt was in 1967 by the People's Republic of China, according to Xi Yongzhang, the head of a hospital in Xinjiang. Once again, not much information is available, only assumptions and rumors that the experiment would have actually worked. Managing to breed a hybrid able to fluently talk a language that it was taught from a young age, showing cognitive abilities, in other words. What is interesting is a performing chimpanzee from the 1970s by the name of Oliver, who became quite popular around the world. Oliver had the ability to understand humans very well and to listen to very specific commands. That was part of the act. But even how well you would try to train an animal, you would not get him to listen to absolutely every command. Apart from this, many people assumed that he seemed to act more like a human rather than an animal. Although this may be an effect of only hanging around humans for a prolonged period of time, says the author, Based on all this information, people actually believed that he was in fact a hybrid between humans and chimpanzees. This was actually used as an attraction for his performance in the 1980s. It attracted so much attention that in 1986, the University of Chicago brought him for analysis. It turned out that he wasn't a hybrid, just a normal chimpanzee that happened to be very talented. Sounds like one of my teachers.
Yeah.
The results from the analysis, as well as further research, can be found in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. In 1981 in China gave the experiment another try and impregnated another female chimpanzee with human sperm. The female chimpanzee became pregnant but died 3 months later due to health complications. Yet, to those that may think that this is a load of rubbish, the Chinese Academy of Sciences has actually confirmed the existence of both experiments from 1969 and 1981. As mentioned before, science has no shame for its unethical work, as in their minds, it is all towards our own benefit. Over the 1990s, there were many other types of experiments that tried to combine human cells with pigs or sheep cells. There are rumors that in 2019, a team of researchers from various medical universities in Spain managed to produce the first half-human, half-monkey hybrid. These so-called unconfirmed reports are coming from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in the United States. Some experts say that this may be the missing link within the theory of evolution, the ability of apes or monkeys to breed with humans, which in a way would make sense if technically based on the theory that they are our ancestors. Nevertheless, it does not matter how unethical this is, as the future surely awaits biological breeding between different species.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is really the crux of it. There's no way once we can do it, we won't. Right now, look,
absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. Now, there are 5 chimeras which were actually created by science. We'll take them one by one. And a chimera is an organism with genetic material from 2 or more sources, right? 2 or more sources. So a chimera is a hybrid on steroids, if you will. Now, experiments in that field obviously could save lives, but are certainly ethically controversial. And this article is by Desiree Schneider, published August 11, 2019. Human monkey. Last week, so this was the first week of August 2019, researchers led by Spanish scientist Juan Carlos Ispizua Belmonte, you gotta love those Spanish names, announced they had created the first human monkey chimera embryos in China. First human monkey, not ape. Apes don't have tails, monkeys do.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of the experiment is to investigate ways of using animals to grow human organs for transplants. Organ banks, really. The organs could be genetically matched by taking the recipient cells and reprogramming them into stem cells. Dave?
Human pig. In 2017, scientists from the Salk Institute again in California, led again by Ispizua Belmonte, tried to grow the first embryos containing cells from humans and pigs. The process proved to be more challenging than expected and was very inefficient. From 2,075 implanted embryos, only 186 developed, up to the 28-day time limit for the project.
But to be clear, you can see it's
some
a numbers
did,
game.
but some did still. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the point. So in fact, about 10%, less than about 8%, right?
That's right.
So if he'd only ever done 5, like what Ivanov allegedly did, or 3 or 5, you don't get anything. I mean, chances of failure are high. If you do 2,000,
woohoo!
All of a sudden, oh yeah, look at that! I got 186 of these guys. 186. The next one is interesting. Human chimera. Human chimera. Now, chimeras also exist in the natural world. There have been a number of documented human cases. Most recently, American singer Taylor Moole, discovered she was carrying genetic material from her fraternal twin sister, whose egg had fused with hers in their mother's womb. This explains a large section of darker skin on her torso. It comes from her sister's DNA. That's interesting.
Wow. The virus chimera. Chimeras can help fight diseases. In 2017, Portuguese researchers created a chimera virus, a mouse virus with a human viral gene, which enables them to investigate new ways to treat cancer caused by human herpes virus infection. The team found out that when the cancer-causing virus loses a protein called LANA, it also loses its ability to cause cancer. Very interesting.
Fascinating.
5 minutes.
The final one, a human mouse. Excuse me. In March, again of 2019, Japan loosened its guidelines, lifting a 2-week limit on the growth of human-animal chimeras, or chimeras, whatever you prefer, and allowing the transplantation of chimeric embryos or hybrids into animals, but not humans. Pending approval, a Japanese stem cell scientist, Hiromitsu Nakauchi, plans to insert human stem cells into mice or rats in an attempt to grow a human pancreas in the animal. As a safeguard, if too many human cells creep into the rat's brains, the experiment will be stopped. Yeah, I'm sure it will.
Sure, yeah.
So, and see, this is actually starting or touched on the law we're going to bring to everybody's attention next week, where the Japanese decided in the infinite wisdom, no, we bring him to term. Let's bring him to term.
Excellent.
Should we worry? No.
Continue the research.
No. That's right. I want my army of flying monkeys.
Fly, my pretties. Continue the research.
But this is really terrifying is the wrong word, Dave. But we watched Planet of the Apes and all that, and we think, yeah, sure, what a lot of nonsense. I mean, you like the show and you enjoy it, right? But if you think about it just for a second here, right? If we can create these chimpanzee, orangutan, gorilla, doesn't really matter, hybrids and other hybrids with other species, and we focus on the human brain. So let's say we create all these species of hybrids with the human intellectual capacity, then the Planet of the Apes really isn't that far away. Not really, because they're in physically better shape than us in most instances.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have, just imagine you have a gorilla. It's I think 300-400 kilo animal. As smart as you, right? And stronger than you, right? By a margin. And they have a whole army of them. Or a whole nation of them, or whatever, because eventually what will happen, and what must happen, because it's just how it works, we will have to give those hybrids some level of rights, Dave.
Yeah, that's Yeah, well, we're going to have to give AI rights. Why not?
I was thinking the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The next 50 to 100 years.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is how rapidly we are actually progressing here. They could see that, Dave. They could see various hybrids with human rights, if you will, AI entities, whatever form they take.
Just robots in general.
Yeah. Could be,
yeah.
But it could be virtual AIs. I mean, AIs that don't actually have a physical form.
Oh yeah. Don't turn me off. Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah.
Right. So
you can't do that, Dave.
And maybe even organisms which at this point we have no idea about, because we're playing with CRISPR and these tools, by the way, are becoming more powerful every day. Where does it end? I have no idea. Maybe we've already seen the end. Maybe we've seen the end. We've seen Pegasus. We've seen the Centaurs and the Satyrs.
I think we've passed the finish line, Becky.
Yeah, that's right. We've seen the Minotaur. I mean, it's forget gender fluidity.
Yeah, I want the the eagle-headed dude like in Egyptian times.
Yeah, Anubis and Horus. Yeah. I keep gender fluidity in a golden frame next to my bed. I long for the days of gender fluidity. Okay, this is where I'm going with it.
You could have all your genes changed while you slept.
Once you have the the processing and storage capacity, yes.
Yeah,
The only thing that's stopping us is compute power. But
That's
compute power, I don't know if you've seen the latest developments. I mean, some amazing stuff coming. I mean, holy moly. Is the next generation or generations of computing equipment, it won't even resemble anything we use today.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And bear in mind, your watch has more power than NASA did when they sent people to the moon.
That's right. That's just crazy talk. I know, but it's real. Guess what? We've come to the end of another Shiny Side Out with David Mackey. This is episode 547. And we'll be back next week. We'll also see you on Tuesday and Thursday nights. But in the meantime, Jer Bear has a great show coming up. Have a listen to it. Dial in, say hello. We did. Here we are. Take care, guys.